In 1972, when I was 35 years old, I, Scarlett Thompson, was buried alive. Each shovelful of dirt hitting the lid of my coffin was an invisible hammer blow, striking directly against my chest. The smell of damp, musty wood, mingling with the scent of cheap satin, was more suffocating than the dwindling, stagnant air. Above, I could faintly hear the prayers commending my soul to God, the cries for a death that had not yet happened. The most horrifying thing was not my imminent death, but the betrayal. The one who buried me was the very man I had respected and considered a father for nearly 2 decades. This isn't a far-fetched nightmare. This is the true story of my life, a brutal truth etched forever by the scar on my chin. The Scarlett of yesterday died in that coffin, but from that grave, a different person arose. If you're listening from anywhere in the world, leave a comment and subscribe, because some truths need to be spread, even if they might shake your faith. Some stories, no matter how painful, must be told. That story, however, doesn't start in the grave. It starts with my birth in 1937, in a dusty adobe hut on the outskirts of this very town. My father, Walter, was a hand on a small ranch, and my mother, Irene, made cheese to sell at the market. We were poor as church mice, but it was an honest life. That life took a sharp turn when my father passed away, and at 14, I had to find work to support my grieving mother. It was July of 1972, one of the most oppressive summers we'd ever had here in Arizona. The kind of heat that shimmered off the asphalt and made the air thick and hard to breathe. Back then, a rancher's word was worth more than a legal document, and in a place like this, the life of a simple woman was worth next to nothing. It was a time when the powerful made the law, and the rest of us just bowed our heads and said, "Yes, sir." But I was never very good at bowing my head, even when I should have. My mother always said I was born with my moon in Aries, whatever that means. All I know is I've always had a spirit too strong for my own good. The man who buried me was the same one who, for nearly 2 decades, had treated me like his own daughter, who sat at my table and ate the food I prepared. He was Arthur Montgomery, an imposing man and the owner of the largest ranch in the region, respected by all and feared by many. They said he built an empire with his own hands, but they forgot to mention the other hands he crushed along the way. I met him shortly after my father died. "You have the look of a hard worker," he'd said. "Come work at my house. I'll give you a roof over your head and a proper wage." For a girl with nothing, it felt like a blessing. I accepted, not knowing I was sealing my fate. For years, Arthur and his wife, Eleanor, treated me like the daughter they never had. They had lost 3 babies, and the sadness lingered in Mrs. Eleanor's eyes. They taught me to read and write properly with a tutor, Mr. Albright, and I learned the ranching business inside and out. Scarlett here has more business sense than most men in suits, Arthur would boast. I became his confidant, his right-hand woman. At Vainta, I married James, a quiet ranch hand. Arthur disapproved. "He's a simple man with no ambition," he warned. 6 months later, James was gone, leaving only a note saying he wasn't meant for married life. I was devastated. Arthur took me back into the main house. "I told you so," he said. But his comfort felt genuine. His comfort then, perhaps it was genuine. But now, at my age, looking back, I can't help but wonder, a man who could bury his adopted daughter alive, was there anything he wouldn't do to keep me under his thumb? Some questions, I suppose, are best left buried with the past. My trust in him deepened. By the time I was 35, in May of 1972, my life was stable. Then, news came that my estranged Uncle Jerome had died and left me a piece of land. I told Arthur, assuming it was a worthless patch of desert. He insisted on handling the paperwork for me. "You're like a daughter to me, Scarlett. Let me take care of this." I signed the papers he gave me without a second thought. 2 weeks later, while Arthur was in Phoenix, a geologist named Edward Martin found me. "Ma'am," he said, spreading a map on the table, "that land has one of the largest concentrations of turquoise and silver I've ever seen. It's worth a fortune." He made an offer that left me breathless. I told him I needed to think, but I immediately called and left a message for Arthur. He returned 2 days later, and the warmth I had known my whole life was gone from his eyes. It was replaced by a strange, hard glint, like a stone at the bottom of a cold creek. "Don't sell," he commanded, his voice lacking its usual fatherly tone. "That fellow is trying to cheat you. The land is worth 10 times more. Let me handle it." In the following days, the house itself felt different. Whispers stopped when I entered a room. He would end phone calls abruptly, his gaze lingering on me with an unreadable calculation. Mrs. Eleanor, who once fussed over me, now barely met my eyes. Then, he made his own offer to buy the land. It was generous, far more than the geologist's, but it didn't feel like a gift. It felt like a demand. His eagerness was a predator's, and for the first time in my life, I felt a tremor of real fear in his presence. "I need to think about it," I told him, my heart hammering against my ribs. For the first time in her life, Scarlett felt a true sense of fear toward the man she had always considered a father. But she could never have imagined that greed could turn a father into a demon, and that the worst nightmare of her life was just beginning. Let's follow along to see what Scarlett will do when she uncovers the horrifying truth. That night, I couldn't sleep. The next day, feigning a doctor's appointment, I went to the county clerk's office. But, "Mrs. Thompson," the clerk said, confused, "you've already sold the land, it's all signed right here." He showed me the document. There was my signature, a forgery transferring the property to Arthur Montgomery. A lifetime of trust was shattered in a single moment. Now, knowing she's facing a wolf in sheep's clothing, what will Scarlett have to do to save herself? Arthur's scheme won't stop here. Let's see what terrible fate is about to befall her. Perhaps you're wondering why no one spoke up. How could people believe a healthy 3-5-year-old woman would suddenly die like that? But you have to understand Red Creek back then. Arthur's power was so great that his word was law. To challenge him was like standing in front of a hurricane you'd only be swept away. My blood ran cold. I returned to the ranch, terrified, pretending I knew nothing. One night, Mrs. Eleanor offered me a cup of tea. "Chamomile from our garden," she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. The taste was bitter, but I drank it. It was my last act of trust. My vision blurred. My body grew heavy, and the last thing I saw was Arthur standing over me. "It's better this way," he whispered. The doctors were astonished by my story, by the marks on my body that proved the struggle for survival in the coffin. "A miracle," the chief doctor said. "I've never seen anything like it in 30 years of practice." The news spread like wildfire. The woman who came back from the grave was plastered on the front pages of the Phoenix newspapers. Reporters came from far and wide to hear my story, to see with their own eyes the woman who had cheated death and unmasked one of the most powerful men in the region. I became a sort of local celebrity, pointed at on the streets, the target of curious and sometimes fearful glances. But I didn't just want to survive. I wanted justice. And justice sometimes requires a patience that many people don't have. What happened in the following months, the legal battles, the recovery of what was rightfully mine, and the most surprising decision I made about the land that almost cost me my life, that's another part of the story I have yet to tell. After clawing my way out of the earth, I stumbled through the desert for what felt like an eternity, guided only by the moon. I was a phantom, avoiding roads, hiding from the sound of every passing truck. By the time I reached the San Pedro River, I was half mad with thirst and pain. There, hidden among the trees, was a wisp of smoke rising from a small wattle and daub hut. It was Ida's house. I collapsed on her doorstep, a mess of dirt and blood and tears. For me, it wasn't just a refuge. It was salvation. It was the only place in the world I knew I might be safe. The kind of place that only those who know the region well know exists. Ida was known by everyone in Red Creek as a midwife. For over 40 years, she had brought almost all the children in the region into the world. Mothers trusted her more than the town doctors, and rightly so. She had steady hands and knowledge passed down through generations. But few knew she was also a healer, knowledgeable in herbs and prayers. Some called her a witch behind her back, but never to her face. No one wanted to get on the wrong side of the woman who could save the life of a child or grandchild in the future. "You're lucky to still be alive, child," Ida said as she treated the wounds on my hands, applying a green, foul-smelling paste that burned like hot coals. "I've seen people die for much less. 3 days in a coffin without water. It's almost a miracle." "It wasn't a miracle," I replied, biting my lip to endure the pain. "It was pure stubbornness. I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of killing me like that." Ida smiled, revealing a few yellowed teeth. "Stubbornness is sometimes the best medicine against death." She finished the dressing, wrapping my hands in clean cloths. "Now rest. Your body needs to regain its strength. Then we'll think about what to do." For the first few days, I could barely get out of bed. The exhaustion was so deep that I slept almost 20 hours a day, waking only to eat what Ida prepared. Hearty broths, substantial porridges, herbal teas she gathered from the riverbank. My body was recovering not just from the 3 days in the coffin, but from the trauma of being betrayed by those I considered family, of having looked death in the eyes. When I could finally stand without dizziness, I began to help Ida with simple household chores. I swept the dirt floor, fed the chickens in the small pen next to the house, washed the dishes with water brought from the river. Mundane tasks that helped me not to constantly think about what had happened, not to relive every moment of those 3 days of darkness. At night, sitting on the narrow porch under the faint light of a kerosene lamp, Ida would tell me what she knew about the events in town. She had a surprisingly efficient information system for an old woman who rarely went to town. Women who came for her remedies, children who ran errands, traveling salesmen who stopped to rest and exchange news. "Your funeral was well attended," she told me one night, blowing smoke from her clay pipe. "Half of Red Creek was there. Arthur made sure to arrange for the best of everything. A cedar casket, expensive flowers brought from Flagstaff, even a priest in a new cassock." She gave a dry laugh. "For someone who was going to bury you alive, he put on a good show." "Who cried for me?" I asked, feeling a strange tightness in my chest. It was bizarre to discuss my own funeral, to know that people had gathered to commend me to God while I was fighting to survive. "The ranch hands, many of them cried for real. You were well liked by them. Maria, the one who helps in the kitchen, had to be held up. She was sobbing so much." Ida paused, as if choosing her next words. "Arthur cried too, and convinced everyone. Crocodile tears, of course. Mrs. Eleanor didn't even do that. She stayed serious the whole time, like she'd eaten something that disagreed with her. I knew I needed proof. My word alone, the word of a ghost, would mean nothing against Arthur Montgomery. "I need the documents," I told Ida, my voice raspy. "The forged ones." Ida looked at me, her gaze sharp. "My son, Michael. He works at the county clerk's office." A flicker of hope. Michael was a quiet, nervous man, but Ida assured me of his integrity. "He has more courage than he looks, and he hates injustice." When Ida brought him to the hut, the poor man looked as if he'd seen an apparition. He listened to my story, his initial shock turning to cold fury. He didn't hesitate. "I'll help you," he said, his voice firm for the first time. "What he did is a crime." Days later, Michael returned with a folder that held my entire stolen life. The forged land transfer, a fake death certificate, and even more damning news that Arthur was planning a grand inauguration on my land to announce his new mining empire. An idea, terrible and perfect, began to form in my mind. "When is it?" I asked. 2 weeks, Michael replied. It was all the time I needed. This inauguration wouldn't be his triumph, it would be my resurrection. Something that shows the documents were forged, that he planned everything. "And how are you going to get that?" she asked, passing me the mug. "You can't just walk into the ranch and rummage through his office." "Michael," Ida said suddenly, as if she'd had an idea. "My son, the clerk at the county clerk's office. He has access to all the registered documents, including the ones for the sale of your land." It was as if a door had opened. "Of course, Michael, the shy man with thick glasses who worked at the clerk's office. I knew him by sight, but had never talked to him much. I had no idea he was Ida's son. She never mentioned family, and he never spoke of his mother." "Would he help?" I asked cautiously. He could lose his job, or worse, if Arthur found out. Ida waved her hand dismissively, as if shooing a fly. Michael has more courage than he looks, and he hates injustice more than anything in life. She smiled enigmatically. Besides, he's always had a little crush on you, since you were kids. We can't tell too many people I'm alive, I considered. The more people who know, the greater the risk of Arthur finding out. Michael is a tomb, Ida assured me. He doesn't even tell you what he had for lunch. She stood up, resolute. I'll go to town tomorrow. I'll talk to him. If he agrees to help, I'll bring him here. Mrs. Scarlett, he managed to say after a few seconds of shock. You're really alive? It wasn't a question, but the astonished realization of something he was still trying to process. I am, Michael, I replied, indicating a chair for him to sit. And I need your help very much. He listened to the whole story in silence, his eyes wide behind the thick lenses, his face alternating between expressions of horror and indignation. When I finished, he took a deep breath, adjusted his glasses in a nervous gesture, and said with a firmness that surprised me, I'll help. What Arthur did is a crime, not just the attempted murder, but the forgery of documents. He hesitated, as if measuring his words. I always suspected there was something wrong with that property transfer. It was all too fast, and the signature. Well, it didn't look exactly like yours. My heart raced. You noticed the difference in the signature? I noticed, but I couldn't do anything. The head clerk had already validated it, and to question Arthur Montgomery. He left the sentence hanging, but I understood what he meant. No one in Red Creek questioned Arthur openly, unless they wanted trouble. I need to see those documents, I insisted, and find out what else he's planning to do with the land. Michael nodded. I can get copies of everything that went through the office, but it will take a few days so as not to raise suspicion. He's invited half the world, Ida said, reporting what she had heard from a client who worked at the mayor's office. Officials from all over the region, bankers, other ranchers. It's going to be a huge event to show that he's not just a rancher anymore, but a mining tycoon. The idea began to form in my mind. When is this inauguration? 2 weeks from now, Ida replied. They're getting everything ready, setting up tents, a stage, things like that. 2 weeks. Enough time to fully regain my strength and devise a plan. Enough time to gather the evidence and prepare for my public resurrection. Michael returned 3 days later, carrying a folder full of documents. He had managed to get copies of everything. The false death certificate, the land transfer documents, the contracts with mining companies, the loan applications to the banks, a complete dossier of Arthur's fraud. There's one more thing, Michael said, looking nervous as he pulled a paper from the folder. I found this in the archives. It's Arthur's will, registered right after your funeral. I took the document, curious. As I read, my eyes widened in surprise. Arthur had named me as his sole heir. It sounds insane, doesn't it? I still find it absurd to this day. But that was Arthur, always thinking several steps ahead. He didn't do it out of love. He did it to fool the world. A cunning move, so if anyone became suspicious, he could say, "Why would I harm the very person I'm leaving my fortune to?" Even in his plan to murder, he had already planned his own alibi. If he died, all his properties, the Montgomery Ranch, the land with the precious stones, everything would pass to me. This doesn't make sense, I murmured, confused. Why put me in his will if he tried to kill me? Michael adjusted his glasses thoughtfully. I think it was to ward off suspicion. If anyone questioned the coincidence of your sudden death right after inheriting valuable land, he could point to the will as proof that he had no reason to want you dead. After all, he was leaving everything to you anyway. It was twisted logic, but it made sense. Arthur was clever. He had thought of every detail to protect himself. He just hadn't counted on me surviving to expose his plan. I spent the next few days studying every document, every contract, every detail of Arthur's scheme. The land I inherited from Uncle Jerome was indeed valuable. It contained one of the largest reserves of turquoise and silver in the state. Arthur had secured enormous loans using the land as collateral and planned to begin exploration immediately after the inauguration. With the help of Michael and Ida, I devised a meticulous plan. The inauguration would be the perfect stage for my reappearance. All the important people in the region would be there, witnessing the moment I confronted Arthur with his lies and crimes. "It's risky," Michael warned, concerned. "He could react violently or deny everything, and say you're crazy." "That's why we need irrefutable proof," I replied, "and a performance that leaves no doubt." Ida, always practical, suggested a disguise. "You can't just show up as Scarlett Thompson before the time is right. Someone might recognize you," warned Arthur. "She brought a mixture of dark herbs. This will dye your hair, and we have to change the way you walk, talk, your posture." In the weeks that followed, I transformed into someone else. My hair, previously brown with gray strands, became almost black with Ida's dye. I learned to walk differently, more stooped, less confident. I practiced a slight accent, as if I came from another region. The scar on my chin, which was already healing, helped to change my appearance. Michael got an invitation to the inauguration. As a clerk from the office, it was natural for him to be present for any document signings. He would take me as his guest, a cousin from Phoenix whom no one knew. On the eve of the big day, Ida helped me choose what to wear. We had managed to get a simple but elegant dress that Michael brought from town. It was nothing extravagant, but it was suitable for the occasion. We didn't want to draw attention before the right moment. "Are you sure about this, Scarlett?" Ida asked, as she adjusted the hem of the dress. "There's still time to change your mind. We could take this evidence straight to the sheriff in Flagstaff, who isn't a friend of Arthur's." I shook my head, resolute. "Number, I want to look him in the eye when I expose the truth. I want him to feel the same shock, the same fear I felt when I woke up in that coffin." I paused, feeling the determination harden within me. "And I want everyone to see the mask fall, to know who Arthur Montgomery really is." On the morning of the inauguration, I dressed carefully. In addition to the dress, I wore a small hat with a fine veil that helped to disguise my face without looking suspicious. I pinned my dyed hair into a tight bun. I put on thick-framed glasses that I didn't need, but that changed my appearance. Looking in Ida's cracked mirror, I saw a stranger, exactly who I needed to be until the right moment. Michael picked me up early, visibly nervous. The whole way to the site, he repeated the instructions. We would stay back, observing. Only when Arthur was on stage giving his speech would I approach. We had rehearsed every detail, every word I would say. The land I inherited was larger than I had imagined, an extensive area of open country with gentle hills. Arthur had ordered an impressive setup. Large white tents, tables covered with fine tablecloths, chairs for hundreds of guests. A stage had been erected on the highest point, overlooking the entire area. Colorful banners fluttered in the wind, and waiters circulated with trays of drinks and appetizers. "He spent a fortune on this," Michael commented in a low voice as we walked among the guests, keeping a low profile. "He must have used part of the loan money he got from the bank." I observed every detail of the event, every familiar face, every official present. The mayor of Red Creek was there, as was a state representative, bank directors, major ranchers from the region, all dressed in their best clothes, eager to please Arthur Montgomery, the new great mining tycoon. Arthur arrived with Mrs. Eleanor shortly after, both smiling, greeting guests like true hosts. He wore a new, expensive suit, and she wore an elegant dress I had never seen before, probably bought with the loan money they had already secured using my land as collateral. Seeing them there, so happy and carefree while I had fought for my life in that coffin, made my blood boil. For a moment, I wanted to abandon the plan and just confront them right there in the middle of everyone. But Michael noticed and gently held my arm. "Not yet," he whispered. "We have to wait for the right moment." The ceremony began with speeches from officials. The mayor praised Arthur's entrepreneurial vision. The state representative spoke of progress and development for the region. A bank representative announced the approval of a multi-million-dollar financing for Montgomery mining. With every word, my determination grew. Finally, it was Arthur's turn to speak. He went up on stage to applause, his face flushed with pride. He began by thanking everyone for their presence, talking about how he had discovered the potential of that land, about his plans for mining. Not a word about how he had acquired the land, about its true owner. It was as if I had never existed. "Now," I whispered to Michael, who nodded nervously. I began to move through the guests, slowly approaching the stage. No one paid any attention to me. They were all hypnotized by the great man and his grandiose speech. "And so, with hard work and dedication, we will transform this land into a hub of development for the entire region," Arthur was saying, his voice amplified by a makeshift sound system. "Where once there was nothing, we will build an empire." I reached the front of the stage and removed the veiled hat. I took off the glasses. I undid the bun, letting my hair fall to my shoulders. I was no longer the cousin from Phoenix. I was Scarlett Thompson, back from the dead. "Nothing, Arthur," I said, my voice cutting through the air like a razor. "This land was mine. You stole it from me, you poisoned me, and you buried me alive to have it." The silence that fell over the place was absolute. All eyes turned to me, mouths agape. Arthur froze on stage, his face draining of all color, his eyes wide as if he were seeing a ghost which, to him, I was. Mrs. Eleanor, sitting in the front row, dropped the champagne glass she was holding, the glass shattering on the ground with a tinkle that echoed in the silence. "It's not possible," Arthur finally managed to say, his voice trembling. "You're dead. We buried you." "Yes, you buried me," I replied, climbing the side steps of the stage to stand face to face with him. "But you forgot to check if I was actually dead first." Murmurs began to rise among the guests. Someone shouted my name. Another asked if it was a trick, a bad joke. Michael appeared at my side, holding a folder with the documents we had gathered. "This is Scarlett Thompson," he announced, his voice firmer than I had ever heard it. "The true owner of this land, who was declared dead a month ago. The documents that transferred the property to Arthur Montgomery's name have forged signatures. I have the proof right here." Arthur looked like a man on the verge of collapse. Sweat poured down his face. His bulging eyes darted frantically from the audience to me, to Michael, to the folder of documents. Mrs. Eleanor had stood up and looked ready to flee, but she was surrounded by curious guests blocking her exit. "It's a lie," Arthur managed to say, his voice failing. "She had a heart attack. Dr. Mendez certified the death. We held a funeral." "And you buried a living woman," I retorted, taking a step toward him. I held out my hands, showing the still visible scars. "I spent 3 days in that coffin, fighting to survive with a hairpin as my only tool. 3 days digging to escape the grave you put me in." The buzz in the audience grew louder. I saw expressions of horror, of disbelief, and what satisfied me most of suspicion directed at Arthur. The respected man, the pillar of the community, was crumbling before everyone's eyes. "It wasn't like that," Arthur tried again, now appealing to the crowd. "She's confused, delusional. She must have suffered a shock, amnesia." "Then explain these documents," Michael interrupted, opening the folder and taking out the papers. "Explain how her signature appears on documents dated after her supposed death. Explain how Dr. Mendez, who supposedly certified the death, was in Phoenix on that day. I have witnesses who can confirm it." It was the final blow. Arthur staggered as if he had been physically struck. He clutched his chest, his face contorted in an expression of pain. For a moment, I thought he was faking, trying to win sympathy, but then he fell to his knees, gasping. "Heart attack!" someone shouted from the crowd. "Call a doctor!" There was a rush, people screaming for help, others moving away in horror. Amid the chaos, Arthur raised his eyes to me, still on his knees, his face now red and twisted. "I didn't want to kill you," he gasped, the words coming out with difficulty. "I just needed the land, too valuable. Eleanor. The tea was her idea." He was confessing, right there, in front of dozens of witnesses. The pain must have been unbearable to make him throw his own wife to the lions. I looked to where Mrs. Eleanor had been, but she had disappeared in the tumult. "Why, Arthur?" I asked, my voice softer now, almost lost in the surrounding noise. "I thought of you as a father. Money," he replied simply, before collapsing completely on the stage floor. The doctor they managed to find among the guests arrived quickly, but it was too late. Arthur Montgomery, the great rancher, the most respected man in Red Creek, died right there, on the stage that was meant to be the scene of his greatest triumph. A more ironic ending couldn't be written. The villain ended his own play on the very stage of his greed. Justice has been served, but Scarlett's story isn't over. Now that she possesses everything Arthur tried to steal, what will she do with this fortune tainted by betrayal? A major decision lies ahead of her. His last act was a confession of attempted murder, heard by all the notables of the region. The chaos that followed is hard to describe. The police were called. Statements were taken. People were crying and shouting. I remained on the stage, standing, observing everything with a strange sense of detachment. I didn't feel joy at Arthur's death, not even complete satisfaction from the consummated revenge. It was more like relief, as if a huge weight had been lifted from my shoulders. Mrs. Eleanor was found trying to flee in a car with a hired driver. She was detained and brought back. When confronted with her husband's confession and the evidence we had gathered, she broke down. She confessed everything. The plan to drug me with the tea, the forgery of documents, the fake funeral. She tried to blame it all on Arthur, of course, saying she had done everything out of fear of him, but no one really believed her. She ended up in jail that same day. As for me, I was taken to the town hospital for an examination. The doctors were astonished by my story, by the marks on my body that proved the struggle for survival in the coffin. A miracle, the chief doctor said. I've never seen anything like it in 30 years of practice. The news spread like wildfire. The woman who came back from the grave was plastered on the front pages of the Phoenix newspapers. Reporters came from far and wide to hear my story, to see with their own eyes the woman who had cheated death and unmasked one of the most powerful men in the region. I became a sort of local celebrity, pointed at on the streets, the target of curious and sometimes fearful glances. The following days were a whirlwind of depositions, documents to sign, officials to convince. Arthur's will was discovered and validated. As Michael had shown, he had left me as his sole heir. In an attempt to ward off suspicion of a possible crime, he ended up leaving me everything he owned. A week after the fateful inauguration, the lawyer handling Arthur's estate called me to his office. He was a serious, middle-aged man who had come from Phoenix especially to handle the case. Mrs. Thompson, he said, opening a folder full of documents. The will is clear and legally sound. As the sole heir of Mr. Montgomery, you are now the owner of the Montgomery Ranch, all of his properties in town, the bank accounts, and of course, the land with the precious stones. He paused, adjusting his glasses. It is a considerable fortune. I remained silent, trying to process the information. I, Scarlett Thompson, the poor girl who sold cheese at the market, the maid who served for years in the big house, was now the owner of everything. The irony was almost painful. Such a bitter irony. He tried to kill me to take one thing, and in the end, he gave me everything. But that fortune smelled of betrayal. It carried the weight of a life. It wasn't a gift. It was a burden, a curse that I knew I had to find a way to undo. There are some details to resolve, the lawyer continued. Debts to pay, including the loans he took out using the land as collateral. But even after everything is settled, you will still have a significant estate. I left the office in a daze, walking aimlessly through the streets of Red Creek. People looked at me, whispered, some even waved shyly. I was now not only the woman who came back from the dead, but also the new owner of the Montgomery Ranch, one of the wealthiest landowners in the region. I returned to Ida's house that night. I still didn't feel comfortable staying in town, much less in the house that had been Arthur's. The old midwife received me with a silent hug, as if she understood exactly the storm of emotions I was feeling. And now, Scarlett? She asked, serving an herbal tea, which I took with some hesitation, still traumatized by the last tea I was offered. What will you do with all this? I don't know, I answered honestly. I never thought I would have so much. I never wanted so much. Wealth is a heavy burden, Ida said with the wisdom of her many years, sometimes heavier than poverty. In the following days, I began to visit the properties that were now mine. The Montgomery Ranch, where I had worked for so many years, seemed strangely empty without Arthur's imposing presence. The employees received me with respect, mixed with curiosity and a bit of fear. After all, I was the woman who had returned from the dead, who had indirectly caused the death of the former boss. The land with the precious stones, the spark of the whole tragedy, was truly impressive. Geologists hired by the bank confirmed what Edward Martin had said. One of the largest concentrations of turquoise and silver in the state, a buried fortune that could last for generations if properly exploited. It was during a visit to this land, standing on the exact spot where the inauguration stage had been set up, that I made my decision. Looking at the land that almost cost me my life, at the gentle hills that hid so much wealth, I knew exactly what I had to do. I went back to town and looked for Michael at the clerk's office. He had become a constant support in recent days, helping with paperwork, explaining legal terms, being a comforting presence amid the chaos my life had become. "I need your help again," I said, sitting down in front of his desk. "I want to make a will." He looked at me, surprised. "A will? But ma'am, you just inherited everything, and you're in perfect health now." "Even so," I insisted, "I learned the hard way that life can change in the blink of an eye. I want to leave everything in order, in case something happens to me." Michael nodded, picking up a pen and paper. "And how do you want to distribute your assets?" I explained my plan in detail. It wouldn't be a traditional will, but something more complex, involving the creation of a cooperative, the division of land, benefits for the ranch workers and the poorer residents of Red Creek. When I finished explaining, Michael was looking at me with an expression of admiration. "That's extraordinary," he said finally. "I've never seen anything like it. Can I count on your help to draft all the necessary documents? It will be a lot of work." "Of course," he replied without hesitation. "It will be an honor." In the weeks that followed, we worked tirelessly on the details of my plan. Michael brought in a trusted lawyer from Phoenix to ensure everything was legally sound. I visited every corner of the properties, talked with the workers, met their families, listened to their needs and dreams. The news that I was planning something big spread quickly. Rumors of all kinds emerged. That I was going to sell everything and go back to the grave. That I was going to turn the ranch into a convent. That I was going to marry some influential politician. I let them talk. Time would reveal the truth. When I finally announced my plan at a meeting with all the ranch workers, there was astonishment, disbelief, and finally, emotion. I explained that the Montgomery Ranch would be transformed into a cooperative where each worker would have a share in the profits and in the management. The land with the precious stones would be exploited sustainably, with part of the profits going to improvements in the town. A new hospital, scholarships for poor children, assistance for the elderly. "Why?" asked John, the foreman who had worked on the ranch for over 20 years. "Ma'am, you could keep everything, live like a queen." "Because I almost died because of greed," I replied simply. I saw what the obsession with wealth did to Arthur, a man who was once good and fair. I don't want that path for myself. And this is the sweetest revenge. Scarlett didn't just defeat her enemy. She defeated greed itself, the very thing that caused all the tragedy. She transformed a legacy of betrayal into a future of hope. Let's listen to the final reflections of this extraordinary woman to see how she lived the rest of her life. "I had seen with my own eyes how greed could turn a father into a killer. This land, these precious stones, they could be a curse or they could be a blessing. Arthur chose the curse. I, the woman who came back from the dead, decided I had to make it a blessing for everyone. There were tears, hugs, words of gratitude, but I knew the road ahead would be long and difficult. Changing structures rooted for generations doesn't happen overnight. There would be resistance, conflicts, challenges, but I was prepared to face them. The night after the announcement, I sat on the porch of the main house. My house now, although I still felt strange in it. Michael came to visit me, bringing the last documents for me to sign. We talked about the final details, about the next steps, about how the cooperative would work. When we finished, we were silent for a moment, contemplating the stars that shone in the clear Red Creek sky. It was then that Michael, always so shy and reserved, gently took my hand. "Scarlett," he said, using my first name for the first time, "what you are doing is extraordinary, turning a personal tragedy into something that will benefit so many people." I squeezed his hand back, feeling a wave of affection for this man who had risked so much to help me. "I'm not doing this alone. Without you, without your mother, none of this would be possible." He blushed slightly, adjusting his glasses in a nervous gesture that was now familiar to me. "I will be by your side as long as you need me, for anything." I smiled, feeling a peace I hadn't experienced in a long time. The road ahead would be challenging, but for the first time since I got out of that coffin, I was looking to the future with hope, not with fear or anger. Life has its ironies. The man who tried to bury me alive to take my lands ended up leaving me all of his. But what do you do with so much when you've seen death up close? How do you handle wealth and power when you've known the true value of life, of friendship, of trust? These were questions I was still learning to answer. One day at a time, one decision at a time. Rebuilding a life after being buried alive is not something you do overnight. It's a slow process, full of advances and retreats, like planting a field after a hard frost. The earth is there, but it needs special care, patience, faith that the seeds will sprout again. In the first few months after Arthur's death, I lived in a strange limbo. I was the owner of properties worth a fortune, but I would wake up in the middle of the night, suffocating, smelling the damp wood of the coffin, hearing the muffled sound of dirt falling on me. The nightmares came almost every night. I would wake up screaming, sweating, my hands bleeding from scratching the mattress, thinking I was scratching at the wood to escape. I couldn't sleep in the dark. I needed at least one lamp lit. And even then, it was difficult. For a long time, I slept sitting in a rocking chair, because lying down reminded me of the coffin. People didn't understand. They thought it was an exaggeration, said I should get over it. How do you get over being buried alive by someone you trusted? It's not something you leave behind like an old coat. Ida was my safe harbor in those early days. I continued to live with her for almost a year, even though I owned the Montgomery Ranch and a mansion in town that had been Arthur's. I didn't feel ready to inhabit those spaces that had been his, that held so many memories, both good and bad. In Ida's simple little house, with its dirt floor and thatched roof, I found the peace that mansions with marble floors could not give me. Time heals all wounds, except an ingrown toenail, Ida would say with her peculiar wisdom. And she was right, at least about the time part. Little by little, the wounds began to heal. The ones on my body first, the ones in my soul took longer. The scar on my chin, earned in the desperate escape from the coffin, became a mark of identity, something that reminded me daily that I had survived the impossible. While I was recovering emotionally, I had a fortune to manage. I've never been a woman to stand still, even in the worst of times. Work has always been my medicine, my way of moving forward when the ground seemed to disappear from under my feet. And now I had more work than I ever imagined. The Montgomery Ranch was huge, more than 12,000 acres of good land, with cattle, crops, cowboys, foremen, a whole structure that needed to function even with the owner dead. The land with the precious stones, the cause of the whole tragedy, was sitting idle, waiting for decisions about its exploitation. There were also properties in town, bank accounts, investments, debts to pay and receive. A tangle of responsibilities that would have frightened even experienced businessmen, let alone a woman who until recently was just a maid. But I knew the ranch like the back of my hand. For 15 years I had been Arthur's right hand, learning about every aspect of the administration, every piece of land, every head of cattle. What I didn't know about paperwork, banks, and legal matters, I learned quickly. Michael, Ida's son, the clerk, was crucial in this process. He understood laws, documents, how the world of the educated men I had never frequented worked. "You have a good head for business, ma'am," he told me one day as we reviewed contracts with suppliers. Better than many a man in a tie who has passed through this office. It was true. I discovered I had a natural talent for numbers, for seeing opportunities where others saw problems, for negotiating without letting myself be fooled. The same ranchers who once looked at me with condescension, the little maid that Arthur treats like a daughter, now had to negotiate with me as an equal. Many turned up their noses at having to do business with a woman, especially one who had come back from the dead. Others tried to cheat me, thinking I was naive or desperate to sell everything. They all left surprised to discover that I knew exactly what I was doing. The transformation wasn't just in business. Little by little, I rebuilt myself as a person. The Scarlet of before the obedient maid, the loyal adopted daughter, the woman who trusted blindly, had died in that coffin. The woman who came out was different, harder, yes, more suspicious, certainly, but also stronger, more determined, more her own person. I stopped dressing like the discreet maid I had always been. I bought new, more elegant clothes that reflected my new position. I cut my hair, which I used to keep in a severe bun. I started to speak louder, to look people in the eye, not to lower my head when important men entered the room. Those who knew me before and after said I seemed like a different person. It's not that I changed, I would explain to Ida when she commented on the transformation. It's that now I can be who I always was, without having to pretend, without having to shrink myself to fit into the space that others determined for me. And there was one pending issue that wouldn't let me move on completely. Mrs. Eleanor. While Arthur had paid for his crime with his own life, his wife and accomplice was still alive, in custody, awaiting trial. Part of me wanted to forget, to turn the page, to let justice take its course without my interference. But another part, the one that still woke up in a cold sweat in the middle of the night, needed closure. The trial of Eleanor Montgomery was one of the biggest events Red Creek had ever seen. People came from all over the region to watch, including reporters from Phoenix newspapers. The makeshift courtroom, normally used for town hall meetings, was so crowded that people squeezed in at the windows to see and hear. I testified, of course. I recounted in detail how she had offered me the poisoned tea, how she had helped forge my death, how she had been an accomplice in every stage of Arthur's plan. It was hard to relive all of that, to taste the bitter tea again, the desperation of the coffin, but I made sure to look her in the eye during the entire testimony. I wanted her to see that I was alive, strong, unshakable, while she was there, diminished, wearing prisoner's clothes, her face marked by fear and shame. Eleanor tried to defend herself, claiming she had been coerced by her husband, that she had acted under threat, that she was as much a victim as I was. No one believed her. The evidence was overwhelming, and Arthur's final confession, heard by dozens of witnesses, implicated her directly. The tea was her idea, had been his words. The judge, brought in especially from Phoenix for the case, was relentless. He sentenced Eleanor to 20 years in prison for attempted first-degree murder and other lesser crimes. She left the courtroom in handcuffs, aged 10 years in a few months, her once haughty face now bowed in defeat. Seeing her like that, I felt no triumph. Justice had been served, yes, but it couldn't erase the memory of that coffin or the bitter taste of her tea. It was simply the closing of a painful chapter, allowing me finally to turn the page. I didn't feel joy at the conviction, nor anger, nor a desire for revenge. Just a sense that a cycle was closing, that now I could truly move on without looking back. It was around this time, with the trial over and my emotional health improving, that I decided to implement the plan I had devised for the properties. The Montgomery Ranch Cooperative was officially founded on a sunny spring Sunday. All the workers, from the oldest foreman to the humblest ranch hand, received a share in the profits and a voice in the decisions. At first, there was resistance. Many couldn't believe that a woman, especially a former maid, would really be willing to share so much wealth. Others, accustomed to only receiving orders, had difficulty giving opinions, taking on responsibilities. Some of the neighboring ranchers said I had lost my mind, that I was throwing money away, that the ranch would go bankrupt in a few months. We proved them wrong. In the first 2 years, the ranch's productivity increased by almost 40%. Healthier cattle, more abundant harvests, more dedicated workers. When people have a real stake in the results, when they feel that the work is also theirs, they do things differently. I had known this all along, but now I had concrete proof to show the skeptics. The land of precious stones that had aroused so much greed was the most challenging project. I didn't want to just exploit it in the traditional way, destroying everything to extract the riches as quickly as possible. I brought in geologists, mining engineers, sustainability experts. Together, we developed an extraction plan that respected the environment, that thought long-term, not just about immediate profit. "You're leaving money on the table," a mining executive from Los Angeles warned me, who had come especially to try to convince me to sell the land. With traditional methods, you could extract twice the stones in half the time. "And then what?" I asked. "When there's nothing left to extract, when the land is dead, the river's contaminated, what's left for those who come after?" He had no answer. For men like him, the after never mattered. Only the here and now, the immediate profit, the wealth that can be accumulated in a lifetime. I had learned to think differently. Almost dying teaches you the value of time, of continuity, of the legacy we leave behind. The mining began 2 years after Arthur's death. It was a slow, careful process, completely different from the rampant exploitation he had planned. The extracted stones, turquoise and silver of exceptional quality, were processed locally, providing work for dozens of artisans in the region before being sold to jewelers in the United States and abroad. Part of the profits went to the cooperative. Another part funded projects in the city. A new hospital, a technical school, training programs for young people. The city slowly transformed. Streets that were once dirt were paved, wooden houses were replaced by brick. Children who would have dropped out of school to work in the fields now had the chance for technical training or even college. Over the years, my fame spread beyond Red Creek. Newspapers in the capital wrote about the rancher who came back from the dead and transformed a town. Politicians came to visit me, seeking support or advice. Businessmen wanted to learn about the Scarlet model of cooperative management. I never sought this kind of attention, but I learned to use it to advance the causes I believed in. Time passed. The decades accumulated. I turned 50, 60, 70. I saw Red Creek transform from a forgotten rural village into a prosperous town, known for its quality of life and the opportunities it offered. I saw the children of the ranch workers graduate from universities, returning as doctors, engineers, teachers. I saw the land of precious stones, now partially explored, being transformed in part into a nature park, preserving the original beauty of the area. Amidst all this, I had my own personal life to manage. Many people asked me why I never remarried after James's abandonment back in my 22nd. The truth is, I had suitors. Yes, men attracted by my story, my strength, and I can't deny my fortune. Some were sincere in their interest, others not so much. Michael, Ida's son, was the one who came closest to breaking through the barriers I had built around my heart. We worked together for years, developing a partnership that went beyond the professional. He had an affection for me that dated back to before the tragedy, and I reciprocated with a growing fondness. We even had a brief, discreet romance, like everything in my life, but we never made it official. "It's not that I don't love you," I explained to him one starry night, sitting on the porch of the house I built on a hilltop overlooking the entire ranch. "It's that I no longer want to depend on anyone, nor have anyone depend on me in that way. I've lived long enough to know that people change, that life takes turns." Michael understood. He was a kind, patient man who respected my decisions, even when he didn't agree with them. We remained close until his death about 10 years ago, a victim of a cancer that consumed him quickly. I lost a great friend, a partner through thick and thin, someone who knew my deepest secrets and still admired me. Ida lived to be 98, lucid until her last day. I took care of her as if she were my own mother, ensuring she had every comfort and attention. When she passed away, on a quiet autumn evening, she was holding my hand. "You were the daughter I never had," were her last words. I cried for days, feeling that I was losing not just a friend, but a piece of my own history. Life went on with its joys and sorrows, achievements and losses. I saw America change, governments come and go, technologies I never imagined become reality. I learned to use a computer at 70, a cell phone at 75, the internet at 80. An old dog can learn new tricks. Yes, I used to say to the young people who were surprised to see me handling devices that didn't even exist when I was born. Now, at 88, I live a quieter life. I live in a simple house on the property that almost cost me my life. Yes, on the land of precious stones. I built a wooden house on top of a hill with a view of the valley and the river. Nothing luxurious, nothing ostentatious, just what is necessary to live with comfort and dignity. The management of the ranch and other businesses has been gradually passed on to the younger generation of the cooperative. I still participate in important meetings. I'm still consulted on major decisions, but the day-to-day is in their hands. They are competent men and women, committed to the values we established together over the decades. My routine is simple. I wake up early with the sunrise, a habit I never lost from my days as a maid. I have my coffee on the porch, watching nature awaken around me. Then, depending on the day, I receive visitors, old ranch workers, young people who want to hear my stories, researchers interested in the cooperative model. In the afternoons, I like to walk around the property, see how the land has recovered in the areas already mined, admire the reforestation work we've done. Sometimes I pass by the unexplored part, touch the exposed stones, feel their energy. I think about how something so beautiful can awaken so much greed, so much evil in people's hearts. The night is a time for reflection. I sit again on the porch, watching the stars, and think about everything I've lived through, the path I've traveled from the girl who sold cheese at the market to the woman who survived the impossible. I think about the lessons learned, the visible and invisible scars I carry, the wisdom that only pain and time can bring. I've learned a lot in these 88 years of life. I learned that trust is like crystal, beautiful to look at, but easily broken, and it cuts deep. It's not that I stopped trusting people after what Arthur and Eleanor did to me. I just learned to observe more, to give trust in small doses, to look at actions more than words. I learned that money is like water, necessary for life, but dangerous in excess. I saw what greed did to Arthur, a man who had everything: respect, power, a comfortable life, and yet he risked it all, even his soul, for more. I decided early on that I would never let wealth corrupt me in that way, that I would use what I had to make a difference in the lives of others, not just to accumulate more and more. I learned that forgiveness is a path, not a destination. Many people ask me if I have forgiven Arthur and Eleanor for what they did. The answer is not simple. I don't carry hatred for them. That would be like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. But I also don't pretend that what they did was any less serious than it was. I understand that they were flawed people, corrupted by their own greed and fear, products of a time and place where power gave a sense of impunity. I accepted what happened as part of my story, without letting it define my entire life. If that's forgiveness, then yes, I have forgiven. Women especially come to me to hear my story, to seek inspiration or advice. Young women who are starting out in life, older women facing loss or challenges, mothers worried about their daughters' futures. For them, I always have words of encouragement, but also of realism. Trust your gut. I always say, that little voice in your head, that shiver down your spine when something doesn't feel right, that's your body's wisdom speaking. I learned to listen to it too late. I talk about financial independence, about the importance of having your own money, your own means of support. It doesn't matter if you're married, single, or widowed. A man is not a retirement plan, I often say, drawing smiles even from the most traditional. He's a travel companion, at best. The road of life is yours to walk, with or without someone by your side. I teach them about self-preservation, about setting boundaries, about not shrinking yourself to make others feel big. You don't owe anyone anything for taking up your space in the world. I say this to the younger ones who are still struggling with the pressure to be nice, pleasant, submissive. Your life is yours, your choices are yours. Listen to advice, but the final decision comes from your heart. I also share about resilience, about the human capacity to survive the unimaginable. If I could get out of a coffin using only a hairpin, you can get out of any hole life puts you in. I tell those who are going through difficult times. It's not easy, it's not quick, but it's possible. One day at a time, one shovelful of dirt at a time. Life wasn't easy for me, not before or after the tragedy. I was born poor, lost my parents early, worked since I was a child, trusted those I shouldn't have, and almost died in the worst possible way. But I also had joys, achievements, moments of pure beauty that made it all worthwhile. I saw the sunrise on more than 32,000 mornings. I smelled the damp earth after the rain. I heard the laughter of children who are now grown. I tasted fruit picked right from the tree, still warm from the sun. I danced under the stars at harvest festivals. I loved, even with fear. I lived, even after almost dying. People ask me if I'm afraid of death after being so close to it. The truth is, death and I are old acquaintances. I've looked it in the eye, felt its cold breath on my face. I'm not afraid, but I'm not in a hurry either. There's still so much to see, to do, to teach, to learn. When my time comes, the real time, not the one forged by human hands, I want to go in peace, knowing that I lived every day I was given, that I turned a tragedy into an opportunity, that I'm leaving the world a little better than I found it. I made my will a long time ago, organizing the transition of everything I've built. The cooperative will continue, now fully in the hands of the workers and their descendants. The land of precious stones, already partially explored, will be transformed entirely into a nature park after my departure, with a small part still being mined sustainably to maintain jobs and the local economy. The properties in town will become community centers, schools, cultural spaces. I have no children of my own blood, but I have a huge family. The children and grandchildren of the ranch workers who grew up calling me Grandma Scarlet, the women I've helped over the years, the young people I've mentored, to whom I gave an opportunity when no one else would. They are the ones who will carry on my legacy when I'm no longer here. Sometimes I wonder what Arthur would think if he could see what I've done with everything he accumulated so selfishly. Would he be angry to see his precious ranch in the hands of a workers' cooperative? Would he be horrified to know that the stones he coveted to the point of trying to kill me are being extracted at the slow pace of sustainability, not greed? Would he finally understand that true wealth is not what you accumulate, but what you share? We'll never know. But I like to think that maybe, just maybe, he would finally understand, that he would see that I transformed his legacy of greed into something better, something that will last long beyond both of us. The scar on my chin, earned in the desperate struggle to escape the coffin, is almost unnoticeable now after so many decades. But it's still there, a fine line that marks the face I see in the mirror every morning. A constant reminder that I survived, that life, no matter how difficult, is worth the fight. When I look back at the long and winding road that brought me here, I regret nothing, not even the trust I placed in Arthur for so many years. It was that trust, that loyalty, that made me the person I am today. It was by needing to survive his betrayal that I discovered a strength I never knew I had. Sometimes, in the quietest nights, I still hear the sound of the dirt falling on the coffin. I still feel the despair growing, the air getting heavy, my nails bleeding against the wood. But now, these are no longer nightmares that make me wake up screaming. They are just memories, scars on the soul that no longer hurt as they used to, because I learned that the past is like the earth of this place. It can hide precious stones or poisonous snakes, depending on how you stir it. I chose to extract the value, the wisdom, the lessons, like agates and amethysts, polished by time and pain. The poison, the resentment, the hatred, I left those buried so they wouldn't contaminate the rest of my life. That's what I'd like to leave with those who hear my story. Not just the account of a woman who survived being buried alive, but the testimony of someone who turned a personal tragedy into a legacy of transformation, who used pain not to destroy, but to build. Someone who understood that the true revenge against those who try to destroy us is not to cause them the same harm, but to live a life so full and meaningful that they become just a footnote in our story, not the main chapter. I'm Scarlett Thompson, 88 years old, and I've just shared with you the story of my life. A life that almost withered away in a coffin, but still rose from the earth, as resilient as a seed. If my story has touched you, and if you'd like to hear more about women who have also gone through such adversity, please subscribe to the channel. This old woman believes that as long as people still tell each other stories, Life still has meaning to carry on. And if you're curious to see what an old woman who seemingly died and came back to life managed to do, just go ahead and click on those videos popping up on the screen. In them, you'll also find stories of resilient women like me, who have faced the storms of life and come out stronger. These are stories that need to be heard, that need to be shared. Because I believe that we learn and grow precisely by listening to those who have walked the path before us.